Hi guys, James at Rampant Lion Reviews again for you today with another beer review. For this one we are going to head up towards Gothenburg once again, or Göteborg as you would say in Swedish, which as I've told you many a time is the Swedish craft beer capital. For this review I think we've got a beer that is really quite interesting. We're going to return to one of my favourite Swedish craft breweries and we're having a look at a beer that they produce every year for the All In Beer Festival, and from what I understand this is iteration number 4 or 5 of them. They seem to tweak it year on year in preparation for the festival. So for this review we are going to return to Beerbliotek once again, and we're having a taste of the Eternal Dankness, which is number 135 according to their numbering system, an Imperial IPA coming in at 9.5% ABV. So this particular version of this beer was released on the 18th of October 2019 through the small partiers, now known as the Tillräcklig assortment. It's Systembolaget here, and it's supposed to be pretty good actually. I think when I checked out the other versions of this beer on Untappd, they all seem to be hitting around the 4-star mark, so hopefully this is another one that lives up to the expectation. I'm not sure whether this will be a New England style IPA or whether it will be a West Coast IPA. If it's called Eternal Dankness, you know, normally you would associate the dankness with meaning West Coast IPA, but I've always had very good experiences when it comes to this brewery, and hopefully this is another very, very good beer. The other thing you have to take care of with this one is that their Imperial Stout is called Eternal Darkness, and I have reviewed that beer for you, but that will appear at a little bit of a later date. This was the one that was released more recently, and hence that was the one that I wanted to publish a little bit earlier on. But very curious to see how this beer turns out, and as always I hope you guys enjoy my take on this one, and I'm very curious just to see whether this is a West Coast or a New England IPA or exactly what it is. But anyway, as is usual with my reviews then, I'll tell you a little bit about the brewery before we taste the beer. If you want to get straight to the tasting, just fast forward. All the usual links are in the description below. That's the brewery website, the link to my other reviews that I've done from Beerbliotek before. No doubt I'll add some more in the fairly near future. There's all the usual social media. If you want to see more beer reviews, do please consider subscribing to the channel. The whole channel of course has a geography based tagging system, so you can go into the homepage and search for beer based on country, city, state, county, prefecture, whatever it is you're interested in. Do check out the playlists of beers from different countries. There is one there for all the Swedish beers that I've reviewed for you. That's constantly being added to, and as always please do get in touch and let me know some of the other beers and breweries that you guys would like to see me review. It's always great to hear from you guys that are watching the videos, and the support that you show the channel is hugely appreciated. So anyway, on to my brewery notes then to tell you a little bit about Beerbliotek. So this brewery, as I told you before, are based in Gothenburg, and they were founded back in 2013 by a multinational group of friends. This is Adam Norman, who's from Australia, Richard Bull, who's from New Zealand, a Kiwi, Anders Hedlund, who is a Swede, and then Daryl Daneker, who comes from South Africa. So Adam and Richard ran Bar Doppio in Gothenburg, and then Daryl and Anders were quite regular customers at the bar, and they often just used to sit and talk about different beer styles and all of these kind of things. So one day they eventually decided that they were going to buy a brew kit and brew their own beer together. The original brewery that these guys started is in the old Klippan Sugar building, which is a really nice old building very close to the old Carnegie Brewery in Gothenburg. Quite an iconic company when you consider craft beer circles and things like that. Pretty much any Systembolaget you go into will have the old Carnegie Porter as one of their kind of main how would you say, one of their kind of mainstay beers in the range that they support. But the brew kit they have in this original brewery was from Brewfab in Scotland, and in their first year they apparently brewed 38 different varieties of beer. All of their beers were brewed in very small batches initially, so this would allow them to kind of stick to their home brewing roots, and originally they used to very rarely brew the same beer, and this meant that they had no fixed range and were always brewing new different beers, if you like. But more recently, of course, some of their beers have become very popular, and so they've rebrewed these and kind of stuck to the recipes. So these guys do have a little bit of a core range now. In 2015, though, they opened up a second brewery in Kungston, which is now where they have their tap room and run their main brewing operations from. The old brewery is now used for producing sour beers mainly, and they're also working on a barrel aging project in the new brewery as well. I believe that the Would I Lie to You, which I reviewed for you maybe about 3-4 months ago, something like that. That was one of the first beers that was released in Sweden from the barrel aging project, and that was a beautiful beer. So I do look forward to trying more beers in that range. They do have a Scotch ale which I would love to get a hold of, but that one hasn't been released through Systembolaget yet. But the idea behind the name Beerbliotek is that they wanted to brew a wide variety of beers so that their customers can always learn something new about hops or malts or whatever. And basically they say it's the same concept as a library, but with different beer styles and stuff stuff like that. So, like I've said, these guys are one of my favourite Swedish craft breweries. From what I understand, they do brew some beers that don't work out, so they never release those. But when you consider that these guys really, they're quite a prolific brewery, and then you try some of their beers, when you consider the quality that they can get out of their beers from just brewing them once and stuff like that, they are very talented in that regard, actually. So this is one of the Swedish craft breweries that I really do recommend that you check out, actually. Eternal Darkness, the Imperial Stout is very nice. I tried their Black IPA, that was very, very good, actually. And I've had a good number of these beers. A Passion for Ginger is another very good one. And that's the other great thing about these guys, is that they're always willing to try different styles, actually. So yeah, if you're interested in Swedish craft beer, if you go along to Beerbliotek, pretty much pick a style that you enjoy, and I'm sure that you will find something that is to your taste from that. And hopefully I can get up to Gothenburg and have a little look at their tap room and things like that, actually. So definitely an out and about video that you'll see at some point in the future. But yeah, that's all you really need to know about Beerbliotek for the moment. If you want to learn more about these guys, you can check out the brewery website in the description below. You can follow them on Facebook and Instagram. That'll keep you up to date with all the latest goings on, and they do have a good list of their different beers on the website as well, but I would recommend you check out the Untappd and Rate Beer pages for that too. But yeah, let's get on to the actual tasting of this beer itself then. So like I mentioned to you, this one is a 9.5% Imperial IPA. It says on the side here, brewed every year for the All In Beer Fest. All In Brewing Company, of course, are one of the many gypsy breweries that you'll find around Gothenburg, along with the likes of Electric Nurse and things. But it says on the side here, brewed every year for the All In Beer Fest, we present the 2019 incarnation of your Imperial overlord, Eternal Dankness. Get in touch at beerbliotek.com. So yeah, Beerbliotek number 135, a 9.5% Imperial IPA. The artwork of this beer has changed a little bit over the years. It is, you know, the first one was in a bottle, and it's mainly just the kind of colour scheme on the can that's changed on the other ones. There is a profile for this beer on the website that shows you all the different artwork and things that they've had. But it says on the back here, there you can see, one of the things I always like about Beerbliotek is that they do say this is a Swedish craft beer. I'd love that if more breweries would do that, put the flag on it, because I think that's one of the great things is, you know, craft beer, it's all about international cooperation and things like that. So a little 330ml can, and this one I think cost me 38 Swedish crowns, which is about £3 sterling, maybe like €4, something like that. So quite reasonably priced for what it is, but let's get it out and we will get on with the tasting then. Really curious to see how this beer turns out, and you can smell some of these like big lovely fruity qualities on this one as you open it up. There's something in my head that's just telling me there's a bit of mosaic in this. Just as we pour it out, there's some nice orangey notes coming out of this, sort of tangerine-y, orangey notes there. But yeah, in terms of appearance, this beer, I'm not sure what to make of it actually, because it looks a little bit New Englandy, it looks a little bit West Coasty at the same time as well. So if I hold this beer up to the light, it comes across as being a very bright yellow, very slightly hazy. If I put my fingers behind the glass there, you can see that it's a nice, very bright yellow colour. There's about a solid 1/3 finger of a frothy white head. That's fading away to be a very thin foamy layer. It's faded away that much that I can't tell you whether it's, you know, pure white or whether it is a little bit kind of off-white or creamy or whatever. But one or two big bubbles sticking towards the side of the glass, you can see them just sitting there. Not sure how well that's going to turn out in the camera, but there's a few little ones just heading up towards that thin foamy layer as well. But overall, looks pretty nice. Nothing overly surprising about this beer when you consider that it's an IPA. Although in fairness, when it's called Eternal Dankness, I would have expected it to be a little bit less hazy and look more like a West Coast IPA. I'm not sure whether on the side it will tell you, but it says here, yeah, no, this one has Vete Havre in it, which basically means wheat and oats, and I've just realised I've read the Swedish one there when I could have read the English. But yeah, this one, if it's got wheat and oats in it, it is going to be a New England IPA, so a 9.5% Imperial New England IPA. As I've always said with this particular sub-style, if you like, I've always found that it's a bit difficult to go above 8% when it comes to New England IPAs, because it's difficult unless you put a little bit of caramel or something in there to cover up the booziness. So I'm very curious to see how this one turns out in that regard, and I'd be curious to know as well as if whether the original versions of Eternal Dankness were more West Coasty and things. So do let me know about that in the description below, because this is the first time I'm coming across one of the Eternal Dankness iterations, of course, or incarnations, whatever you want to call them. But overall, looks pretty much as you would expect from an IPA these days. So let's take a closer look at the aroma and just see how we get on. Oh yeah, so that's really quite interesting actually. It smells a little bit sort of, it's almost a little bit like farmhousey, it's almost a little bit like Heady Topper or something like this actually. It's got that quite rustic kind of farmhousey base to it. So you've got a nice little bit of a kind of pale malty quality in there, some white bready notes. You can pick up that slightly thicker wheaty note as well. Some of the oaty creaminess is in there, but I would say that this beer definitely has that kind of rustic farmhousey kind of quality to it, and that usually comes from the yeast. If you think about the Heady Topper, for example, it really has that almost slightly, it's like vegetal herbal kind of thing. You can really pick up a little bit of that in this beer. So this one's like a kind of old school, if you can even call it old school, New England IPA. But in fairness, at the same time, the juicy fruitiness of this beer is really, really quite prominent. There's a little bit of a biscuity malty quality to this one, but really the malt base to me comes across as being quite Heady Topper-like and quite, it's like one of these more farmhousey New England IPAs rather than being quite creamy and wheaty as you can sometimes get from the Gothenburg IPAs, such as, you know, OO Brewing and Stigbergets and things like that actually. So this is a little bit of an unusual beer, this one. But I like how that aroma goes together. The malt base is quite prominent in this one, but I'll say straight away you can really smell just how boozy this beer is because of how prominent those sort of biscuity McVitie's digestive malts are in this beer. So pay attention to that when you try it. In terms of the hoppy side of things, I would say there's a little teeny bit of earthiness in there. There's a good little bit of a floral aromaticity to this beer. No real like pine resins or anything like that. A little bit of a lighter grassy note too. But if I had to, you know, plant my colours or whatever, I would say that this beer leans a little bit more towards the kind of floral aromatic side of things in terms of the green side of the hops. But I really like how that goes together. The fruity side of this beer is very, very nice. Yeah, so in terms of the, how do you say, the fruity side of this beer, it's quite interesting because there is a little bit of a kind of tangerine note to this one. There's something in here that's telling me there's mosaic. It could be something a little bit different, because there is also a bit of a tropical fruity note to this one. Sabro, from what I remember, also gives you a nice kind of tangerine orange note that's fairly similar to what you would get from Mosaic. And I'll just tell you now, I like playing guess the hops with these IPAs when you don't know what's in them. It could be Sabro, it could be a straight up Mosaic, but there's a nice juicy tangerine note to this one. There's a sort of mango-y, there's a sort of tropical fruit note to this one. There's a bit of mango to it, there's a little bit of an apricot-y note, but it might have a little bit of that stronger passion fruity quality also, which is kind of interesting. And I really like how that goes together. It does have a little bit of an apricot-y, passion fruity note to it, which is nice. So I would say I've got a feeling there might be like Sabro, Mosaic, something like that. There could be a little bit of Galaxy or something, I'm not quite sure. The other thing that I'm noticing out of this beer is that there is a good little bit of a limey quality, and if there's lime in there, that could be Equinaut or it could be Motueka from New Zealand. It's probably more likely Equinaut when it's a European brewery. It's easier and cheaper, from what I understand, to get the American hops than it is to get the New Zealand ones, but there is a good limey presence to this beer too. Maybe a little bit of sultana, kind of pineapple-y notes too, but for me mainly mangoes, maybe a bit of a darker passion fruit, tangerine oranges, and then a little bit of a kind of limey quality as well, to be honest. But you can really smell the booziness out of this beer. So if you get this one, knocking the beer over, if you do get this this particular beer, take a little bit of time to enjoy the aroma before you get stuck into it. So we'll have a taste of this beer now and see how we go on. This one is the Eternal Dankness, a 9.5% Imperial IPA, the 2019 version, from Beerbliotek in Gothenburg in Sweden, one of my favourite Swedish craft breweries. So let's get stuck in. Slange, skål, cheers. That's pretty good actually. It's a very solid, on first impression it's a very solid New England Double IPA. If I think about this one compared to other ones, it actually reminds me of some of the beers that I've drank in Malmö Tap Room. It's got a very similar vibe to that, actually. This one's more of a kind of big, oily New England IPA, if that makes sense. I have got a feeling that probably the other iterations of this beer that came before, back in 2015 or whenever, they were probably a little bit more kind of West Coasty than this one. This one, when it says Eternal Dankness, normally you would expect something that is, you know, like 50, 60 IBUs, something like that. This one definitely, it's not quite got that level of bitterness to it. I think we're looking around maybe 40 IBUs with this beer. It doesn't quite it doesn't quite give you that big bite that you expect in terms of the dankness. When you think about, you know, West Coast IPAs and stuff like that. So that's one of the things I would say about this beer straight away, is this is more of a New England IPA, this one, rather than a West Coast IPA. And if you're going to call it Eternal Dankness, you know, for me, it should have a big hoppy blast to it, whereas this one it's solid enough, and there's nothing wrong with the beer. It's just perhaps the name of it that makes it a little bit kind of, the name I just think doesn't quite fit this one, but that's me being picky, to be honest with you. But as a New England IPA, it's another very, very good effort from Beerbliotek. So yeah, let's try and break this flavour down a little bit then. Straight away in the middle of your palate, you can feel a nice sort of bready, wheaty quality. That just blankets the middle of your palate there. There is a bit of a pale malty note just sort of covering the middle of your tongue there. On top of that, you start to get a smoother kind of wheaty note out of this beer, and that thickens up a little bit the further you go into the aftertaste. And the more as you move in towards the middle of your palate, there's a little bit of a kind of creamy, oaty note there. And in the very centre of your tongue, there's a little bit of a kind of biscuity quality as well. And I really like how that goes together. I mean, the malt base in this one doesn't do anything particularly surprising. But at 9.5%, like I said, I've always had concerns about the New England style when it comes to alcohol contents that are above sort of 8%. But this beer does cover its booziness quite well, although in fairness, when you taste it, you will know that it is one of the boozier takes on this particular style. But it doesn't, you know, as I say, it doesn't blow the head off you. So it's quite well balanced in that regard. But malt base is quite solid in this. It doesn't do anything surprising, but in that regard it gets a thumbs up from me. On the hoppy side of things, back corners of the palate, there is a little bit of earthiness there. That's another thing that makes me think there is perhaps a little bit of a mosaic in this one. I've always found that mosaic has a little bit of a distinctive earthiness, and the notes that I'm getting out of this beer do make me think mosaic. As you move further forward, you can feel that just smooth out a little bit. As you reach the front corners of your palate, there's a nice kind of floral aromaticity to the beer, and then round the very front curve of the palate, it's a little bit lighter and more grassy, and then behind the front curve of the tongue, that's where you get that nice oily bubble where those juicy fruity esters start to push their way out of the beer. And for me, this is where this one really kind of starts to shine. This is where it starts to show a little bit of its complexity. I would say in terms of the green side of the hops, this one really leans a little bit more towards the kind of darker floral aromatic side of things. And perhaps, you know, when I was saying earlier that if you call something Eternal Dankness, you know, it really should be a West Coast IPA. One thing we do have to acknowledge is that the perception of an IPA for a lot of beer drinkers has changed these days. So a lot of people that have got into beers a little bit later than me, for example, will just kind of accept this as an IPA. They might not have encountered the West Coast IPAs on the same scale that I would have back in, you know, 2013, 2014 with the stuff that Brewdog were producing back in Scotland, actually. And I think probably when I think about how the Swedish beer scene has gone, I think that the New England IPAs have been a lot more prominent in Sweden than the West Coast IPAs ever were. So that's something I think that we need to consider when it comes to this beer. And if I compare this to other New England IPAs, this one is a little bit more dank and sort of floral and aromatic compared to some of the other ones. So in fairness, I might criticise it a little bit because of my past experiences, but I can see where Beerbliotek are coming from. But again, this is me nitpicking about the name of the beer and stuff like this. But if I think about Eternal Dankness, I'm expecting a West Coast IPA. But in fairness to them, they've produced a solid kind of New England double. So, you know, we can't really fault them for that. This, as I say, I'm just being very, very picky in this review. But yeah, in terms of the fruitiness of this beer then, that's the next thing we need to look at. As I always say, the fruity esters in a beer will come out in that lovely kind of oily bubble that you get behind the very front curve of the tongue. And they're very boozy in this one, and I like that about it. So if you go towards the back of your that oily bubble there is a little bit of that kind of strong passion fruity note. There's maybe a little bit of a kind of mango kind of quality as you come further forward there, and as you move further forward, I think there's a bit of a kind of more margarine, not margarine, marmalade-y, sort of tangerine orange there. So it's a good balance between more tropical and citrusy fruits, this one. You can feel it's almost like a kind of marmalade on toast kind of thing, actually. It reminds, this beer in fairness reminds me a little bit of the marmalade on rye which I had from Tempest Brewing Company back in Scotland a good couple of years ago. There is a little bit of a kind of deja vu about this beer when I think about that one. So I wouldn't, there could even be a little bit of Amarillo in here now that I think about it, because I'm sure that marmalade on rye used the Amarillo hop, and it seems to be the case now that Mosaic, when it comes to orangey hops, Mosaic seems to have replaced the Amarillo, but now you've got Sabro, you've got Mandarin of Bavaria, you've got Pacifica from New Zealand, Azaka is another orangey hop as well. You've got all of these kind of different alternatives that you can use, but this is quite, to me, the orangey presence in this beer is quite strong, and that means that it really kind of hits a spot for me. So yeah, a little bit of passion fruit towards the back of the oily bubble there, a bit of mangoes and things like that, maybe apricot-y notes as you come further forward, a nice tangerine orangey note there, and it's quite a boozy tangerine orange as well, but as you come further forward on the palate, the beer leans a little bit more towards the kind of limey note for me, and that makes me wonder if there is a little bit of equinaut in here. I don't think it's Motueka, because it's not the limey notes that come out of Motueka, they're quite oily, but at the same time they're quite bright and juicy, whereas when it comes to equinaut is a little bit more just pungent for me. So I think it might be Mosaic and equinaut that's been used in this one. I wouldn't be surprised if it's one of those two. It could be Amarillo and a little bit of Citra or Galaxy or something like that. As I say, I always like playing Guess the Hops with these beers, but the flavour profile, the fruity notes is really quite nice actually. And the other thing you'll notice is when you take this beer in, at the front of your palate, the fruity notes come across as quite juicy, but then, and they're quite sharp in the beginning. I'd say they lean a little bit more towards it's sort of a combination of a limey, tropical fruit kind of note, but then as they sort of smooth out a little bit, more of these complexities push their way out of the beer. So this one is definitely one of these beers where it's interesting just to see how the flavour evolves actually, so bear that in mind when you try this beer. In terms of the mouthfeel though, I would describe this one as being quite, I think this is quite a full-bodied beer, but it's at the bottom end of full-bodied. Carbonation is really quite smooth. When I compare this to other New England IPAs, I think this is quite an oily one, and that suits it because it is a little bit more boozy. In terms of hoppy bitterness, I think we're talking 40 IBUs at a minimum. It could even be around 50 at a push, but compared to some of the West Coast IPAs, this one isn't going to blow the head off you in terms of its carbonation. The malt base is quite smooth. It's got a little bit of that. It does thicken up a little bit the further you go into the aftertaste, in fairness, and you've got a nice kind of, it's quite a sort of jammy, marmalade-y kind of fruity quality you get with this one. The fruity notes in this beer are very big and very oily. They're not sharp, but they sort of immerse themselves into the booziness that this beer presents to you. But overall, this is a really, really nice double IPA. I was expecting a West Coast IPA out of this one, but in fairness to them, they've produced a really quite solid New England double, so you can't really fault them for that. It's just me being a bit picky with the name and stuff like that. But another really interesting beer from Beerbliotek, and I'm glad that I was able to review this one for you here on the channel, so we'll leave it at that. This one is the 2019 version of the Eternal Dankness at 9.5%, a New England double IPA from Beerbliotek in Gothenburg in Sweden, brewed for the All In Beer Festival, which is one that hopefully I can attend at some point in the fairly near future. But yeah, another interesting beer from Beerbliotek, and I'm sure I'll return to these guys in the near future. You will see me review the Eternal Darkness over the next couple of weeks. I'll publish that video a little bit later, of course. But yeah, let's leave it at that for this one. Once again, thank you for watching my beer reviews. Until the next time, please like, subscribe, share, all the usual YouTube stuff. Let me know your own thoughts on this beer in the comment section below. Let me know what your favourite beers are from Beerbliotek as well. Make sure you check out my social media, and I will catch you guys very soon. This is the Eternal Dankness 2019, a 9.5% New England double IPA from Beerbliotek in Gothenburg here in Sweden. Until the next time, Slanja just now, and I'll catch you guys later. Slanja, skål, cheers.